Going live, and we're live. Okay, so for anyone who might be watching, this is kind of an impromptu Google Hangout that our friend Joe Conkle set up. I don't know if you can see Joe in the, I don't know if his pictures are showing. Joe's microphone is not working, so even though he set this up, he can't talk. Well, he could talk, none of us can hear him, which could be a blessing. But this is just a time for he has a friend, Spencer, who will be joining here, and Spencer wanted to talk about presuppositional apologetics, and so have no idea where we're going to go, but what I'm going to ask, Spencer, if you could just, I guess, introduce yourself, since we just met maybe about 10 seconds ago. Just give an introduction to yourself, and so people do know you profess to be an atheist, right?
Yes, my name's Spencer. I'm an atheist. I met Joe maybe getting on a year, not quite a year ago. We mostly have discussions on Facebook, and this is the first time we were going to have a sort of live debate, and it's sad that he doesn't have audio.
Well, that would mean either that he could claim he won and had nothing else to say, or you could claim that you won because he said nothing in response. So either way, you both.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay. There's always a bright side. All right, so we'll start with this. You had some specific things that you wanted to bring up with presuppositional apologetics, right?
Yeah. Joe brought them up originally, and if he could maybe enter them into the chat box anyways, that might be a good way to start.
Okay, we could do that. So Joe, we're going to leave you to put into chat. Let me ask you this, Spencer, what is your understanding of presuppositional apologetics?
My understanding of presuppositional apologetics is that it hinges on the idea that all beliefs ultimately reduce to presuppositions, which are beliefs that do not have any further justification. So, for instance, for any given belief, we'll take the example of young children. Young children are famous for asking their parents why to some of the the most obvious things, and then the parent gives an answer and the child just returns with why again, and why over and over again, no matter what the answer is. And I guess the idea with presuppositionalism is that eventually the chain of whys has to stop, and there's some kind of foundational element that doesn't have any further why to it. It's just there. It's a belief that is just simply held.
Okay, that wouldn't be so much accurate. So let me give you a different way of understanding. Maybe that it maybe help you. It's the idea that the starting point. There's a couple different ways actually of addressing it, but a starting point is as a presuppositionalist, there's two presuppositions I won't give up in a discussion, and that is there is a God and He has spoken. Okay.
Okay.
So as a presupposition, every single person brings a presupposition to every argument, right? Depending on your worldview, that is going to be the starting point of where you're going to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not anything bad with anything. I mean, if you profess to be an atheist, you're going to approach things from that perspective. That's going to be your presupposition. So a presupposition is not a bad thing. We have to be aware of it, first off, just so that we know, because we have to be willing to question our presuppositions to see whether they're valid. And that's where people make mistakes, because they never question their presupposition.
Okay.
That's one understanding of presupposition, just in general. Presupposition.
So in your view, a presupposition is something that can be changed by reasons at some point.
In the general term presupposition, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to make the distinction between a presupposition and then presuppositional apologetics, right? So
Okay.
the fact that people use terminology, presuppositional apologetics is a system, not just the idea of a presupposition.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. So with presuppositional apologetics, the argument is that without God as our starting point, we can't know anything. And it doesn't mean that people don't know things, right? You would profess that you don't know God. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
And yet you know things, right?
I think so, yes.
What's your name?
Spencer.
And you know that.
Yes.
So you do know things.
Well, we can delve into that a little deeper later, but yeah, for the purpose of what you're saying, yes.
Yeah. So now, and I'm saying this carefully because I do know that some people make the argument that they think that when we talk presuppositional apologetics, that we're saying that unless you first know God, you can't know anything, and then people are like, "Well, I know things." It's not that you have to profess a belief in Christ to be able to know things. That's not what it is. The argument goes is that we say that the necessary starting point in knowledge is God because of his nature. We have an ability to know things because that is I'm going to give the technical term and then I'll explain it, but it is a commutative attribute that God gave to man when we were created in his image. So what that means is that there's certain attributes when God created man that he communicates to us, that he gives to us, that are why we're made in the image of God. Emotions, knowledge is one, an ability to reason, things like this. Therefore, we would say that the starting point is that God exists.
Okay.
Now, the apologetic ends up being used to view this as in your worldview, where you would profess to be an atheist, we would just be chemical reactions, correct?
Physically, yes.
Okay. Is there an immaterial part of us?
Immaterial part of us. The organization of the matter and energy, the way that it's arranged is not necessarily physical. It manifests in the physical, but the actual arrangement itself is more of an idea or a concept.
Okay. Do you understand what I mean by immaterial?
Why don't you go ahead and define it for me, just so I know exactly what you mean. Not
material.
Yeah, okay. So does material includes matter and energy?
It would be matter. Energy would be. I think energy is going to be material, because it is energy is a reaction within atoms and things. So
yeah. Well, Einstein said that matter and energy were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Not that we have to go with what Einstein said, but I think he's probably pretty close.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So matter and energy effectively make the material, and then there's something else that is not them, which is immaterial.
Correct.
Okay.
So I would say things like an ability to reason, knowledge, truth, the laws of logic, morality, our conscience. These are things that are immaterial. They're not something that's physical.
Okay.
And so if we're purely chemical reactions, how do we explain an immaterial world that we see about us? That becomes the way that this apologetic ends up being used. It's the starting point it's kind of like when you look at evolution, say, it starts with life already beginning.
Okay.
They can answer the question of where did life begin, and that becomes the real issue: is can you explain life from that worldview? Can you explain an ability to reason from a purely naturalistic worldview?
Are you adding life to that list of things that are immaterial then?
Well, life is a little bit harder to define because you have both a material immaterial part that defines life, right? We have cells that can reproduce.
Right.
We have beings that can reproduce. And there's a physical aspect of that. But also with that is an immaterial part of it that we can't really explain how that happens. Right?
Well, could you give maybe an example of where I've seen that, or where we can find that immaterial part and know that it's there, even though it's immaterial? I mean, I'm not hung up on whether it's material or not. Can you give me an example?
Well, our conscience, our ability to reason.
Okay.
Here, laws of logic.
Yeah. Can we hold 1 second? I need to grab a glass of water.
Okay.
All right, I'll be right back.
This makes for great live hangouts. The person that is talking disappears. Actually, we should put his camera on so you see an empty room. And I'm talking to myself, or anyone that's out there watching. But I should click on this and see if we could. Let's see if we could see Joe in the little thing here.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
Not a problem. I'm trying to see if I can go to the actual YouTube page here and see if we could see Joe. Yeah, I think we see Joe. So, all right. So.
Hi, Joe. Wish you were on the air with us.
Oh, he's on with us. He's just not talking. Well, he is talking. It's just we can't. Yeah, no one can hear him.
Well, I would like it if you would contribute some to the discussion in the chat room if you can.
Yeah. Start typing, Joe, or get a real microphone. Yeah, test out this technology, buddy, and make sure it's working. All right. So, and I guess what I could do, I don't know how many folks may be watching. I just went over to the YouTube, but I can try to take. Maybe we can. There's a question. If you have questions, anyone that's watching can post them in the comments there. But
yeah, we can do that.
Since this was kind of last minute, so no one was prepped for it to know to watch. But all right, so we were talking laws of logic.
Yeah, laws of logic.
Then you went up to get a drink.
Yes, I did. Laws of logic. So you're saying the laws of logic are immaterial, and the direction of your argument is that really we can take them as an indication that an immaterial dimension does exist, and in fact that that leads to God, and that God ultimately is the necessary explanation for immaterial things like the laws of logic. Is that correct?
That'd be correct.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, you and I would both agree that there was a time before there were human beings, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Now we might disagree on how long. I'm going to say it's a couple of days. You're going to say maybe it's, a
lot longer than a couple of days. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at least we have that in common, though. We believe there was a time before human beings.
See, now you're a young fella, so see when I was, a teenager, the universe was only 420 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
A couple years ago, it was only 4.4 7 billion, and now it's up to 5.2 billion. So it just keeps getting older and older. In amazing how it's not getting older by years; it's getting older by billions of years every couple of years. But anyway, I digress. So before there was a human being, let's look at one of the first things in the laws of logic that when you take a class in logic or in philosophy. You're going to learn about the law of non-contradiction. Are you familiar with that?
A equals A is A cannot be not A.
Correct. In the same way at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay. That is one big... He said he was going to get a glass of water. He got a jug of water.
I do. I drink from a jug. I'm sorry, and I'm thirsty. I haven't done a live show before, so maybe I'm a little nervous, so maybe I'm just don't get to talk this much.
Well... People don't usually get nervous talking to me. It causes nightmares, this face, something about it, But I'm sure you'll get over it and be able to sleep eventually.
Hopefully.
Me, Freddy Krueger, we got something in common. No.
Maybe with years of therapy.
Okay, so the universe, applying the law of non-contradiction, before there were human beings, this law was still in effect, so that the universe cannot exist and not exist in the same way at the same time. Is that correct?
That sounds like an application of the law of non-contradiction. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it sounds right to me.
And so what that says is that's not something that we invented. It's not a concept that we invented. It's something that is because of the nature of the law. And so what you see with these is that...
So the law of non-contradiction is not invented.
Yeah, we would discover it.
So, okay. Well, but there's also that caveat of A cannot be not A in the same way at the same time.
Correct.
So there may be different ways of the universe being, which are not logically contradictory.
So the universe could have not existed, and then a moment later existed. That could be.
No, I don't think that. I was just talking about the details within the universe. I was confused if that was what you were referring to.
No.
Like if the universe had to be exactly this way with the meteors and exactly the positions they are, or whether there's some variability there.
No, I'm saying that the universe itself. The universe is constantly changing in the sense it's expanding. There's things moving in it. So I'm not saying it has to be identical to at all times. What I'm saying is it can't have existed. All of the matter in the universe having existed and not existed at the same time in the same way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. And so, when we look at these things, let me ask you this: Would you agree that rape is always wrong for all people in all circumstances?
I would not agree with the statement as phrased that way. I would rather rephrase it that I'm not aware of any situations where it is okay. Okay.
Why do you want to make that distinction?
Because, quite simply, I don't know everything, and so occasionally there are things that surprise me. Like, take a different example, killing someone. There are clearly times when killing someone is okay, where you're executing a murderer or acting in self-defense or something like that. So okay. I'm not aware of any situations like that for rape.
How about if we change it to raping children?
I mean, I would...
For fun.
My issue is not with the deed. It's with the use of the words always and all and at all times and so forth.
So why do you have an issue with the always and at all time?
Because I haven't existed always and at all times, and so I don't know I don't know for sure whether there are any exceptions.
Okay. And
just like there can be exceptions about not killing people, but again, I would stress that I'm not saying it is okay. I'm not aware of any situations where it is okay. I hesitate from making grand statements of always at all times and so forth because I haven't existed always and at all times.
Okay. And this becomes the issue is when it comes to morality.
Yes.
With these different things that we're looking at, they're immaterial. They're also universal and absolute. Universal meaning they apply to all people, and absolute meaning, basically it's not a subjective thing. And typically what you see is people like yourself, Spencer, who want to make that, in this case, the issue of rape, subjective by saying, well, you don't know everything to be able to say that you just can't think of a situation that it would be okay. Mm-hmm. But if you could think of a situation, then you might be willing to say it is okay.
It wouldn't necessarily be that I thought of a situation, but maybe if I encountered one. Again, I can't even imagine such a situation where it would be okay.
I can't either.
I just hesitate away from statements of always and at all times.
Would you be willing? You know who Adolf Hitler is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
So was Hitler wrong in what he did with the 11 million people that he murdered?
Well, I mean, I think he was wrong, but I'd have to ask you what you mean by wrong. Because I suspect that we may have different definitions at work.
Well, yeah, I'm going to say wrong is defined by a violation of God's nature.
Okay.
Which is the whole point, is when we talk about something like rape, in your worldview, if you're going to profess to be an atheist, which, by the way, is impossible to be an atheist, you've already exposed that, right? Because an atheist would be one who knows God doesn't exist, and you've already admitted that you don't know everything there is to know in the universe, correct?
No, not exactly. I would take the same stance that I did with the rape example, which is that it's not that I know for sure that there is no God. It's that I consider God, the existence of God, to be a poor conclusion given the data that I've encountered so far.
Okay. And I'm going to argue that that's a confirmed bias, but
okay.
I'm going to try to see if we can show that throughout
sure.
that. So the first point, though, is that to know that God doesn't exist, to be an atheist, would mean that you have to know that God doesn't exist, which would require you to know everything there is to know in the universe. Which, by the way, if you knew everything there was to know in the universe, what would we call you?
Omniscient.
Yeah, God.
Yes.
Right. So you.
I'm not God, as far as I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should acknowledge that Joe made a comment here. He said, "Do you always have a problem using always?" And the answer is yes, I think.
So, with that, with the thing of, so you'd really would be called an agnostic, not an atheist. Better terminology.
There's a tremendous amount of arguing in the atheist and agnostic movements about that. Some have said that agnostics are just wimpy atheists, and some have said atheists are just arrogant agnostics.
Well, yeah, I think what it is that people who want to use the term atheist typically are redefining it to be, as you had said, you don't believe in God, which would actually be agnosticism. But that's a side point. So let's go back to, so you argue that in what the evidence you see, you don't think there's good evidence for God. Is that correct?
I think the God hypothesis as an idea that's being put to the test is in the category of ideas that are actually untestable because they don't make any specific predictions about what the world should look like in the context of there being a God.
Okay. Now, I want you to flesh that out a little, because, the Bible makes plenty of predictions and they're all accurate. So the fact that you say it can't make predictions would be one thing, but how would you expect to test it?
All right, so I'll just give an example that I've encountered before, and we'll see if this applies and if we're understanding each other correctly. So in my encounters with people who don't believe the theory of evolution, for instance, and we get into these arguments and we talk about, for instance, the DNA of living creatures. And I point out that there's a really high correlation between the DNA of human beings and the DNA of chimpanzees, for instance, and that this correlation goes beyond the functional DNA and actually goes into the junk DNA as well.
You realize you just used language that exposes a confirmed bias.
Okay, could you explain that?
There is no junk DNA. The DNA, well, that's an assumption because, well, if we don't know purposes of things, we call it junk. It's like vestigial organs there. Well, we don't know a purpose of it. Well,
sure.
It doesn't mean it didn't serve a purpose.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of echo from your side
okay.
every once in a while. Either way, well, yeah, that's true to some degree. I mean, some of the DNA that was thought to be junk or non-functional has been discovered to have a function since then. But there's other DNA for which we know actually how it comes about, and it comes about through these. I'm still getting the echo.
Really? Right.
Yeah, it just throws me off a little bit. I mean, I can deal with it if we have to.
I'll put some earbuds in. It just started happening recently. This microphone used to compensate for that.
It's just every once in a while. Just like right there.
All right. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't want to go on a long rabbit trail about DNA, but I'm still getting the echo. Sorry if I've...
It'll be gone in a second. Hold on.
Okay, no problem.
There you go.
Well, I could just take my headphones off for a second. So,
well, keep your headphones on.
Oh, okay. So, biologists have discovered these things called retroviruses, which are sections of DNA that, as far as we can tell, make copies of themselves in our own DNA, add no benefit to ourselves. They simply happen to fit together in the right way to trick our cells into making more and more copies of them. And this composes a huge portion of the human genome. They're called retroviruses. So we actually do know what their function is. It just is irrelevant to human life. And we know of some species where they're absent in their DNA, so it's not a necessity. But either way, I was talking about the untestability of the God hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned the similarity between human and chimpanzee DNA. And a common response I'll get is that that's simply the way the creator decided to design it. He happened to decide that it would be good to create organisms that had so similar DNA. He had similar designs for them, similar plan, whatever. So that's the explanation that's given. But I have to wonder that if it had happened to be, before we'd done the experiments, before we'd measured the genomes, and we went out and we found instead that the DNA was completely different, I suspect that we would hear and say, well, that was the creator's will. That's how he wanted to do it. Okay. So it seems that it equally, I'm not aware of any specific example where the theory sticks its neck out and says, if this isn't true, I fail. I've lost. Again, with the example of evolution, for instance, if that DNA similarity hadn't been there, then the theory that humans and chimpanzees have a recent common ancestor would be disproven.
Okay, hold on. How similar is the genome between an amoeba and a human being?
I don't happen to know.
Okay.
Do you know?
It's about 85%.
85% similarity.
Yeah. So when you talk similarity, you have to realize that the range is not that big. What are we closest? What animal are we closest to? A chimpanzee or a pig?
As far as I know, we're closest to a chimpanzee.
Nope, a pig.
We're closer to a pig.
And that's why we can use pig hearts and lungs and things like that in human beings. You see, a chimpanzee is what we look like.
Some of the proteins, but it's not true about the whole genome. And the genome is what we use to measure common ancestry.
Yeah, of course, because that's what when you start with the conclusion, you're always going to ignore anything that doesn't support the conclusion. That's called the confirmed bias. And so this is the thing, when you do things, we have to look at all the evidence. When you say that something is not supporting, is not reasonable.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying. It goes against. I've been studying biology. I'm not a professional. I don't have a degree in it or anything, but I've been studying it as an amateur for a good 6 months or so, specifically genetics quite a bit, and I haven't seen this data that you're talking about. And I've been going to creationist sites as well as evolution sites. For just one quick example, you say 85% within amoeba, but I have a friend in Texas who's a PhD geneticist I talked to, and I just recently had some correspondence with him where he informed me that the similarity between I believe it was different kinds of birds is only 75%. So I find it very hard to believe that a human and an amoeba are 85% identical.
There's also, in the recent, I want to say 3 years ago, they discovered a second chain within the DNA coding, which is a whole new thing. So when we say, when you're saying the genome, we haven't, there was the claim that it was fully figured out until we figured out more of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Sure.
The real issue is not similarity, but differences, because that's what can't be explained.
Okay.
Okay?
What
How do you get all the differences?
The differences between humans and chimpanzees, like our hairlessness.
Anything.
Okay.
Any animal that you're going to have. Take, for example, the first time there was an animal that went from asexual to bisexual.
Okay.
You had to have that animal suddenly get all male and all female organs at the same time in the same place and know what to do with them. If you had just an asexual being that became male and it had no female, it dies out. Same thing with the female. If you have an asexual being that suddenly becomes female, it suddenly dies out.
At what level of complexity do you think that change would have happened under the theory of evolution?
Well, then the real issue becomes, when you talk complexity, is the irreducible complexity. How these changes had to happen completely. You can't get a partial change. You can't suddenly start getting blood into your system without a heart to pump it or lungs to give it air or a clotting mechanism, because the creature is going to die. Giraffes can't just suddenly have long necks, even over time, without having the right heart to be able to, pump, the stronger pumping to get the blood to get up to the brain. Then you need a way of being able to not have the giraffe basically have all the blood rush to its head when it lowers its head to drink water. So there have to be these, basically has like this sponge-like thing to basically keep it from getting lightheaded when it picks its head up quickly, or all the blood rushing to its head when it puts its head down to drink water. You can't remove any one of those parts.
You can't remove it completely, but you understand that the theory of evolution says that these changes happen gradually. If it has a shorter neck, it can have a smaller, spongy thing.
Yeah, except we don't see that in the fossil record, which is what Darwin said. If throw his theory out, if you didn't see that,
well,
we see is things fully
in the fossil record. We have a shorter neck giraffe. It's called the okapi. It's still alive today.
Now look at what you're saying. What you have is another type of animal that you assume is a short-necked giraffe. That's the
Well,
assumption.
I recognize them as related species because they share so many common traits, and they're you can see just in their appearance, but then we can measure the DNA too, and see that they have long sections that are identical.
So if I drive a Ford and you drive a Chevy, they're both made by the same manufacturer because they have similarity?
Well, if they had the same, if they had, see,
They
it's
both have
not.
four doors, four tires,
Yeah, well,
five lug nuts on each tire?
those would be good examples if we were just looking at the outside appearance of the animal. But when we're looking at the DNA, we have all the encoding information that actually builds the animal. And we're talking about long sequences of DNA. In the human genome, it's 3 billion base pairs.
Okay. So
Yeah, Joe points out we're getting a little off topic.
Yeah.
I am enjoying the subject, but...
yeah, I was going to, yeah. So here's the thing, though. When you are researching all this, you're using things that you can't explain in an atheistic worldview.
Logic?
Logic, knowledge, truth.
Okay.
You see, this is the whole thing. You say there's no plausible, and where we got to this, and what I was looking for is for you to explain to me, how would you test God? You say you were not convinced because it wasn't testable. The question I had started asking was, how are you going to test for it? How are you going to test God?
Right. Well, exactly. The trouble is, if there's no way to do a test, then I'm left with believing that either it's possible it's true, or it's possible it's not true. And it's just a coin toss away which one is right. Unless there's a way to put it to the test, I have no way to differentiate the one from the other.
And yet you're using the proof right in front of you the whole time.
Okay. So as far as I'm aware, logic are discoveries about reality made by humans, and the laws of logic, the so-called laws of logic, are statements expressed in human language of those discoveries that we have made. There's nothing granted or revealed about them, as far as I can tell.
So in an atheistic worldview, how could you ever say rape is wrong?
How could I ever say rape was wrong? It would all depend on the definition of right and wrong. I'm wondering if that's getting off topic again, but...
Well, it's to the issue of morality, which is, again, a proof of God.
Yeah.
You can't... In an atheistic worldview, if we're just chemical reactions, what we do just is. It's not right, it's not wrong. You take vinegar and pour it into baking soda, and you're going to have a chemical reaction. It's not morally right, it's not morally wrong. It just is. Right?
No, well, again, it would all depend on our definitions of what right and wrong means. So I would define right and wrong in the context of maximizing the well-being of conscious creatures.
Okay. Who defines that?
Who defines that? Who defines that? We all define it, basically. I mean, there are obvious examples, and then there are little bits in between. There are details in between where it's not so clear. There are gray areas. So, for instance, we could describe a woman living in a jungle somewhere where they don't have a stable government and they're at civil war, and she's currently being chased through the jungle by killers that want to rape her and then kill her, and they just killed her children a second ago. Now, call me crazy, but I would call that a bad life or a bad situation. It doesn't relate to any condition that anyone would call human well-being. I would regard someone who tried to say that was just as good as anything else as a crazy person.
But but in your scenario, she just exploded, put a dynamite and exploded a whole tribe of people.
She just did that?
Sure. Now they're chasing after her for justice.
Okay. Well, then that would make the context different.
So that doesn't define the answer to the question. Who is the one who gets to define, in your worldview, who gets to define what's good for all sentient beings.
Yeah, well, reality would define ultimately what leads to the well-being of conscious creatures. And it's not up to us to just decide. I can't decide that breaking my legs feels good all of a sudden. And neither can anyone else, as far as I can tell. I mean, there are people who are mentally ill who might think that, but the conditions that lead to human thriving are not subjective. I mean, free commerce, for instance, really does help people be more free and more wealthy and so forth. It's not just up for grabs. It's not just a subjective whatever we want. We can just say whatever we want is true. So reality defines, just like reality defines how atoms bump into each other. I mean,
where do you know what reality is?
No, as in like no for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Well, if you're going to judge that something is right and wrong based on some standard, I mean, I'm trying to get you to nail you down on who gets to define this.
Yeah, I said reality gets to define it.
So what's reality?
Reality is the sum total of all experience.
So a bad LSD trip is actually reality.
Yeah, it's a subset of reality.
So somebody really can have pink elephants that are flying because they're on LSD. And so pink elephants actually can fly.
If that was the sum total of their reality, if their entire life was a LSD trip, then I guess that would be the conclusion they'd have to come to.
But if they're on that LSD trip, that is their experience.
Yeah, so, temporarily, in this universe, as far as I know.
So again, I'm trying to get you to explain who defines what right and wrong is. Because you're saying reality, and yet reality is not consistent. Someone on an LSD trip has a totally different view, according to your definition of reality, a totally different experience.
The rapist is looking out for his well-being, says Joe.
Yeah.
It could be. The rapist doesn't have a very long-term view of what's going to happen to him, especially if he rapes the wrong person. He doesn't have a very long-term view of what a society is like where that kind of deed goes unpunished. And he's clearly not thinking of what he would like to have happen to the people that he loves, for instance. So he's not being very consistent, I would say.
Why would consistency matter?
Why would consistency matter? Because he's just going to go living one way, and then he lives a different way, and then he lives a different way, and he's going to find... I guess there's no reason anyone has to care about consistency. I happen to care about consistency.
Why?
Why do I care about consistency? I don't know. I want to effectively interact with the world I live in. Like I want to be able to go to McDonald's and get a burger when I want to. And so I get in my car and I go there. Now this is based on a whole bunch of knowledge I have about the world that is fit together consistently. If I was behaving inconsistently, then I am very likely to be diminishing my own goals.
I mean, you're struggling to answer, that. It's very easy for me. It's just because God is consistent. That's why we don't see chaos in a universe. We see an order. We see design in the universe. Why? Because that's God's nature. That's who God is.
But is that really an answer? Because I'm just saying it's just because it's how reality is. You're just saying it's because
reality is defined by the nature of God. That's how we know what reality is. You're saying in your own definition, you're saying you want to be consistent, but you can't stay consistent with your own definition of reality. You're saying it's the experience.
How is I inconsistent?
Because an LSD trip is someone's experience, and yet that is not reality.
Yeah, but I said the sum total of reality. I didn't say their particular one time or maybe a couple times, but their limited experience somehow
but it is their
became
experience,
reality.
Is it not?
Yeah.
Okay, but that's not reality.
It is a piece of reality. Their brain really did react in the way it did to the LSD.
But that doesn't make it real.
Their interpretation that there are actually floating pink elephants in the world is not correct, I don't think.
So you're saying it's not correct, but again, what's the standard?
The sum total of experience. See, we have lots of experience of elephants. Very few of them are pink, and the ones that are pink are in the context of LSD only.
So, well,
the regular gray ones are in the absence of or mushrooms or any kind of psychedelic, we could say.
So was, Hitler, who was looking to, based on his view of evolution that he was teaching, was trying to wipe out what he thought were the half-man, half-ape, which is what he referred to as Jewish people.
I'll need a quote on that, because my understanding is that Hitler never left Christianity. I'm not going to try to pin him on Christians.
You got to get off the atheist blogs and actually read Hitler's writings. Read Mein Kampf.
Okay.
In Hebrew school, it was required reading in Hebrew school.
Yeah. I don't spend all my time on atheist blogs, by the way.
Well, I mean, when people argue that Hitler was always a Christian, Hitler was never a Christian. He put the genuine Christians in prison and set up his own version of Christianity, and he was also supported by the Roman Catholic Church, which would call biblical Christianity anathema, accursed. So he was supported by the Roman Catholic Church, which would not be biblical Christianity. He put biblical Christians to death because of the fact that they believed in an absolute.
I'm not trying to argue that he was a consistent Christian. I'm just I'm not particularly.
No, but what he did believe in, which you won't see, heard, or read about ever since him, is eugenics, which was Darwin's cousin is the one that built that. If you read any of the history on Planned Parenthood, you'll see that Margaret Sanger, that's her view. Her view was to wipe out black people in America and around the world to create a better race of people. That was exactly what Hitler was trying to do, and both of them would argue that what they're doing is to try to create a better evolution for people.
Yes, I've heard this before. Now, what I'm wondering is, what was their evidence or standard for their concept of what made people better? I mean, it seems like it was just kind of pulled out of their butts. I mean, or just based on their silly traditions or something. I mean, it doesn't seem
because they believed that they were more involved.
Well, that's silly under
that was their reality.
Well, that's not what the theory of evolution it says. No species alive today is more evolved than any other.
No species is more evolved?
No, there's this mistaken view that evolution is some kind of grand ladder leading up to this crowning achievement of humankind with their massive brain. But evolution is just a process that adapts species to their environments over time. I mean, it could not possibly then have happened slowly, because what you just said is that that all creatures are at their max. No, I didn't say they're at their max. They're just at the current point they are in evolution. Evolution is just a force that goes on. But there would have to be some things that evolved into what it is today. So there's got to be something that's not full, that it formed, and it's still in the process. I mean, it's a lower form. Are you aware of how genetics and reproduction works? Yes. That's why I know that evolution's impossible. I don't even know how you can say that. I mean, genes can. You can read a PhD geneticist like Michael Behe. Yeah, but on the I don't really trust Michael Behe because of his behavior during the Dover trial. And because of his association with the intelligent design movement. Okay, so look at what you did. So I really do appreciate you just proved what I said earlier, that you have confirmed bias. You reject evidence based on. I reject behavior. Unreliable sources. But I'm aware of his
but
argument of the bacteria flagellum and irreducible complexity.
But
I'm
any
aware of that.
source that disagrees with you.
No, here's why I think he's an unreliable source. During the Dover trial, this is on record, he testified that there was no evidence that, for the evolution of the human immune system. The prosecution then placed about 20 or 30 papers and books on the subject in front of him and asked him if he had read any of them, and he said no. So he felt okay testifying that there was no evidence at all, and then when the evidence was presented, he said, oh, he'd never read it. But Kenneth Miller...
Yet that's exactly what you started this hangout saying, is that you don't know everything. But you expect him to, and if he doesn't know everything when he makes a statement...
Sure.
Then...
Well, if he gracefully
wrong.
admits that he was wrong on that subject, then I would consider that a good thing, and I would continue to trust him.
So
as far as I know,
you're saying that the way he handled himself in a trial means that the evidence, the actual science that he did, doesn't count.
Well, he did.
So what you're doing is you're rejecting actual science.
Well, we could talk about his actual argument with the bacteria flagellum. So the bacteria flagellum.
The point that I'm trying to show here, though, is that you're not being consistent.
I don't see how I'm being inconsistent. Can you point out where I'm being? I'm sorry.
Well, I just did. Right. So you're saying that you don't know everything there is to know, and you don't want to be held to that, but you're holding Michael Behe to that.
I'm not holding Michael Behe to know everything there is to know. Not at all. I didn't say that.
The issue.
I think if someone's going to stand behind a podium and swear before a court and testify that there's no evidence for the evolution of human immune system, he ought to have at least made an effort to read books that were easily available to any scientist of that caliber.
And there's no possible way that he could disagree with the conclusions they make.
Well, he could, but he made it clear that he was completely unaware of the research, and yet he made a statement about it. That seems dishonest to me. I don't make statements on subjects that I'm completely unfamiliar with. Certainly not strong statements like that.
But you're making strong statements here off of 6 months of research on biology? I wouldn't.
On the subjects that I've learned a little bit about. You can go check anything I say.
So here would be the thing. When you're going to do this, this research,
sure,
you're relying on our worldview as Christians.
Okay, you're going to have to demonstrate that.
Well, I have been.
Okay.
You're going to use things like logic, morality. You're going to choose right and wrong. We've been discussing morality throughout here. You can't, in your worldview, you've been having a great amount of difficulty to try to say who it is that gets to make the rule of what's right.
Because it's not a who. It's reality, as I said. I mean, reality determines that photons come off of light sources the way they do. I didn't get to decide that. I don't know that anybody gets to decide that. The question is not who. The question is how does it work?
Why is rape wrong?
Rape is, I would call rape wrong because it, as far as I can tell, is an unnecessary cause of harm to conscious creatures.
Not for the rapist.
Sure, it's unnecessary for the rapist.
He thinks it's fine.
Well, he's wrong. He's wrong in his job. I'm defining right and wrong.
Okay, so are you willing to say homosexuality is wrong?
No, I'm not willing to say homosexuality is wrong.
Why not? Who gets to define it? Is it right?
I need you to define the terms right and wrong in a way that I can understand. I'm just saying God says so. To me, doesn't seem any different than me saying reality says so.
Well, there's a difference there, and that is that you have an inconsistent position, and I don't. I can be very consistent.
You keep saying that, but you're not demonstrating it.
Because experience is different for different people. There is not a sum total of experience for everybody.
Okay.
I've given you examples of that just with the extreme example of an LSD trip.
Uh-huh.
You want to say, well, okay, that's the sum total. So fine. So slavery should be fine, correct?
No.
Why not? It's the reality.
The same reason I said the rape was wrong.
But it is the experience for many people.
I didn't say experience was right.
You said the sum total of the experience, and that is the sum total of their experience.
So do you think it's possible to have knowledge which is absolutely true and infallible?
Yeah, God has absolute knowledge and is infallible.
Okay, how do you know that?
Because nothing in this world would make sense otherwise.
How is that so?
Because you wouldn't be able to have this conversation. How would you be able to say anything consistently? See, when you talk consistency, you're talking our worldview and not your own.
Not as far as I know. What's consistent about, I mean, I don't know what your particular theology is, but I don't see anything consistent, for instance, about the doctrine of, say, the Trinity. I mean, it says that something can be one and three at the same time. How's that consistent?
Because that's a wrong definition. How about you try defining it? What's the Trinity?
Trinity. The Trinity says that God is three persons in one being.
Nope. You see, and this is the problem. You're making statements that you said you don't make. You don't say things that you don't know.
I'm pretty sure that it was one of the catechisms. I forget exactly which one it was. Says three persons are in the one God: the Father, the Son, and the Spirit.
Three separate, distinct people in one Godhead. That's not three equaling one.
Okay.
That's three something separate, one something. It's like saying it's three apples to one orange. Okay? You're
so is it like a multiple personality disorder kind of situation?
No, it's the just because you're not able to comprehend God doesn't mean he doesn't exist. Just because you can't comprehend and I can't comprehend everything there is to know about God doesn't mean he doesn't exist.
Well, do you know that he is a Trinity?
He says so.
How do you know that if you're unable to comprehend him?
Because what I can comprehend is what he's revealed about himself.
But how do you know that he's revealed himself to you rather than, say, you've been tricked by Satan?
Because we have an objective source, his word, that we can study.
Yeah, but how do you know that that's actually accurately his word? I mean, to my knowledge, the word was assembled by a political process in the church over hundreds of years. And many of the church fathers...
another subject that you haven't studied. And you're speaking...
I happen to know that Martin Luther, for instance, wanted to have a number of books removed from the Bible.
Correct.
So
because he had issues with his theology.
Okay. Well,
but
what I'm wondering is
that you argue didn't exist, that exists in atheist blogs.
I've heard it from biblical historians.
Like who?
Like Bart Ehrman, Richard Carrier, Robert Price. These are atheist writers.
Like I said, you just proved my point.
Okay, so you're saying that I shouldn't listen to them.
Well, you have a confirmed bias. You're only going to take information. So
I'm happy to take some information.
So let's take what Bart Ehrman says. Bart Ehrman bases his argument on a document called Q.
No, I don't believe in the Q document.
Yeah, because it never existed.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they can't find it. But the argument is all based on that. Even though the document, there's no historical evidence for it. Why does someone believe that? The whole argument that the Bible was a political process was based on a document that there's no historical evidence for.
Okay, I may have faulty knowledge about this, so I'd like you to educate me on this. How did the Bible come to consist of the 66 books that it does now in history?
So basically, the books when they were written were always accepted at that time as being scripture. Okay.
How do you know that?
Well, we see Peter writing about Paul, calling it scripture. That is contemporary, being written at the same time.
You're referring to the letters of Peter, like 1st and 2nd Peter?
Mm-hmm. And he writes about Paul's writings, which were at the same time period, and refers to them specifically as scripture. We have Daniel and Nehemiah, same thing. Okay, where they'll mention one another. We have the writings of Jeremiah being called scripture by Daniel.
So one guy says another guy's... Isn't that a circular argument?
No, the argument is that it was at the time of the writings, they were accepted as being the Word of God. Not everything being written was accepted that way. It's also internally consistent and externally consistent.
Okay, so to Joe, by the way, Joe just said something. He said I should study the biblical historian James White. I've actually watched at least 2 debates between James White and other people that disagree with him, including other Christians like John Dominic Crossan.
So the thing is that, let me ask you it this way, Spencer.
Yes, sir.
What evidence could I give you that would convince you that God exists?
I don't know, because I don't know of a clear definition of what God would entail. In other words, I don't know what I could go, what, if I say a big booming voice from out of the sky, well, would that
I would say that could be a bad LSD trip.
Okay, yeah. So I'm looking for something that I can actually test and confidently say, okay, that's God.
And that's why you turn to His Word. And
Joe, why do I need to watch more than a couple debates with somebody before I come to my conclusion about his position? I mean, they're debates. They're timed debates. He gets equal time to the other person. I've heard his positions. I find them wanting. He just asserts that the Bible must be true and then starts everything from there. He doesn't critically examine it like these other scholars do. Okay,
so for folks who, Spencer's responding to some things that Joe's typing in chat.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yep, just to give context. But listen to what you just said in response to Joe. That you're not looking to look at what they're arguing. You're saying he's making an assertion.
I went and watched a debate. But
you're saying he made an assertion, and yet these other people make assertions that you don't consider those to be assertions. I mean, Bart Ehrman makes an assertion out of thin air, Q, from Coelum.
I mean, I've watched a lot of Bart Ehrman as well. I've watched him debate Mike Licona, for instance, and I've never heard him, I may have heard him reference Q, but I've never heard him base an argument off of Q.
Well, if you've read his books as I have, you'll see that's his argument. I mean, it's based on, you're basing it on a document with an assumption that the document must have existed. Not with proof. That's a confirmed bias. And you're trusting something that has no supportable evidence, and you want to argue on, well, show me evidence for God. Now, I've asked you what type of evidence you'd accept. You haven't answered.
I said I don't know what type of evidence would satisfy either of us that there's actually a God that exists, because I don't know of any clear statements of what the God hypothesis predicts.
But you're arguing that it's not testable. That's not. So how would you know?
How would I know? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't add it to any of my beliefs because I can't test it.
Okay, so I want to do a quick thought experiment with you, Spencer.
Sure.
Roughly, you don't have to give exact if you don't want to, but roughly, how old are you?
I'm 24.
Okay, where were you born? Just state even.
Ohio.
Okay, I know for a fact that your actual name is Stephen. You were born in 1929 in Italy. Now, I would like you to prove that I'm wrong.
Prove that you're wrong. I don't think I can prove that in the way that I think you mean the word proof. I can provide evidence for it, and you may come to the conclusion. A birth certificate, social security number, driver's license. I would say the birth certificate
is fake, just like the president's.
Of course. No, well, I disagree with that second part, but whatever. I'm not a fan of the president, but I don't buy the idea that he's a Kenyan or anything.
but that could be faked. Your birth certificate could be faked.
Yes.
So
okay. So here's my point. As far as I can tell, all knowledge of all beings is fallible.
Well, work with me on this for a second.
Okay.
Okay. What evidence could you give me to prove that you're not Stephen born in 1929 in Italy?
What evidence could I give you to prove that? Okay. So I think at this point we've actually arrived at the topic that we meant that this was sort of supposed to be, which is induction, particularly. And I can't prove it in that sense. I can't prove it in the sense of the long-standing debate about induction that I don't know if it started with David Hume, but he certainly made it famous.
Well, the point that I'm trying to get to is that in anything that you give me for an argument, if you tell me go talk to my parents, I'll tell you that they've lied to you. You know,
okay.
If you give me a driver's license, I'll tell you that I had fake ID when I was 18. I mean, whatever you give me.
Apparently, I'm some kind of vampire if I can, or because I'm looking this young and healthy at having been born in 1929.
Well, I hope to look as good as you when I'm that age, you know?
Yeah.
But you see...
I think we all do.
If I start with a conclusion, okay, and I'm not willing to question that conclusion,
mm-hmm.
then what I will end up doing is only accepting evidence that supports the conclusion, and I will accept anything, no matter how insane it sounds, that supports the conclusion, that gives a good reasoned argument. So you have something like blue stars. We know that blue stars can't be blue for millions of years, yet we observe blue stars. So
okay.
What do? We say there's an Oort cloud. You know, of course, Oort names it after himself. There's an Oort cloud that just produces new stars. Have we seen that? No. What is that? That's something we throw out there. We call it scientific, and we say, see, there's an Oort cloud. That's how we explain blue stars and comets and these things. But there's no evidence for it. It's no different than Q.
Okay.
It's a life-saving device to save, really, the argument.
Mm-hmm.
That's not science.
Fair enough. I agree with you on that. In the principle, anyways. I mean, I'm not sure. We could go all day on different scientific subjects that we happen to disagree on, and we would really need to be pulling up evidence and citations and so forth to if we were arguing biology or astronomy or something right here. We're talking about knowledge in general.
But even in that, again, the presuppositional argument would ask, mm-hmm. how could you account for knowledge mm-hmm. in your worldview? Mm-hmm. Because knowledge is an immaterial thing. I can't pour a cup of knowledge. And knowledge is something that is not based by your definition on reality.
I would argue that knowledge is a state in the human brain, which is a material thing.
The human brain is, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But the knowledge that we have and what defines truth, because this is, I keep coming back to this because this is the area where you're having a great amount of difficulty, and I don't know that you're seeing it yet, but when I keep asking who gets to decide, you keep saying reality. Reality is not something that makes decisions.
No, it sometimes just is, as far as I can tell. Or I don't know why it's the way it is.
Well, it's a concept.
Okay.
But
no, actually, I think reality is the only thing that really can't be a concept. Reality as a sum total of experience is just the stuff that when I was born, I opened up my eyes and stuff just started flooding in. As far as or maybe I don't even have eyes. Maybe I'm in the Matrix. But in any case, data is coming in from somewhere, somehow. And it's being processed. And that's reality.
But
and that's
in your
what my entire
definition,
life
that's
depends
just a
upon.
concept. I'm using your definition. That's just a concept. That's not. You're saying reality is something, and reality can make decisions, and yet it's based on.
No, I never said reality can make decisions. If I say reality decides something.
How do you know that rape is wrong? How do you know slavery is wrong? How do you know homosexuality is right?
We already went over that.
But you couldn't give a consistent answer. That's the reason I'm going back to this.
I did give a consistent answer.
You're using a circular argument. You're saying it because we experience it, that makes it right. Yet when I say what defines right and wrong, you go back to reality. Well, reality can't define the very thing that it's justifying.
Okay. Is it a fact of reality that when you mix vinegar and baking soda together, they fizz?
That's a fact of reality.
Okay. Is it a fact of reality that when you rape someone, it causes the signals in the brain that we call pain and suffering in their brain, almost always?
To who?
Is that a fact of reality? To the person being raped.
Well, why not argue for the rapist?
I didn't argue for anybody yet. I'm just asking, is that a fact of reality?
See, the issue there is you're going to get into, with this, you're getting into emotions, consciousness.
I know, but do you think it's a fact of reality that the person being raped feels a mental state we call suffering?
As pure chemical reactions, no. In your
Really?
worldview, there should be nothing wrong with that.
I didn't say anything about whether it's right or wrong. I just asked you if it's a physical fact that they are experiencing a brain state that we call suffering.
Okay, so you're saying suffering is wrong.
I didn't say that yet either. I just asked you if there's a physical state in their brain that we call suffering, and if that's a fact when they're being raped.
So I'm going to agree with that, and now I'm going to ask you, is abortion wrong?
Me personally, it would depend. It depends on the term to me, actually.
And
of the
a
abortion.
child that's in the womb that has been proven to feel pain when they inject it with poison that's going to kill it, when they cut it up and suck it out with a vacuum, it feels pain. By your definition of rape, shouldn't you say that it is always wrong to have abortion? Not whether it matters to you. That's the reality in your...
No, and I would agree. I would agree with that. I would actually point out that the vast majority of what are called abortions do not actually take place on a thing that can actually feel pain.
But that's been proven that they feel pain, just like...
It does occur sometimes, but for instance, the abortion debate isn't just about, say, the partial birth abortion for the late, third trimester.
I'm not even talking about partial birth.
Okay, fair enough. Well, on those infants that are...
Second trimester.
Okay, fair enough. But
see, and because what are you going to do? You're going to say that rape is okay if the person feels... What if you have someone that's in a comatose state? Then can you rape them?
Can I rape them then?
They don't feel anything.
Can I rape them then? I guess I never thought of that one. I can't see why anyone would want to, but... no, I don't think so, because it has to do with what kind of functional society you can create, too, with a set of rules. And you have to have a set of fair rules in order to have a functioning society, as far as I can tell.
Okay, so now you're saying society determines, not reality.
No, well, there are facts of reality about society. And the fact of the matter is that in a society where it is treated as okay for people to just go around raping people and murdering and whatever, that the members of that society are going to have to live in constant fear and fighting with each other.
And throughout history, though, we've seen plenty of those type of societies.
Yeah, and they are not particularly successful either. The ones that are most successful are the ones that enforce rules against that kind of behavior.
So then, would you support Sharia law?
No, as far as I can tell, it causes unnecessary suffering.
Yet it seems to be very successful.
Yeah, but it's like the last vestiges of an order of a time period that has otherwise faded away in all the rest of the world.
Seems to be dominating all over the world right now.
Dominating all over the world.
Yeah, even the Western world.
What on earth do you mean?
Let's see, most of the Middle East, Europe is starting to fall under it.
Yeah.
America is starting to cave to it.
I've heard the talk of that, but I'm not aware of any real evidence that America is falling to Sharia law.
Oh well, we're already having judges that are interpreting the law based on Sharia law in areas where Muslims are involved in courts.
Okay.
That's how it starts. That's how it started in the UK. So you say I'm pointing these things out, but what I'm seeing is you're all over the place. You're saying
all over the place
because you're saying society, you're saying reality, you're saying it's experience, and as I give you examples for things.
I'm saying the society that allows raping and murdering people is wrong because it's a society that causes unnecessary suffering.
So it's society that defines it.
No, I defined right and wrong as that which causes unnecessary suffering or promotes well-being.
But yet you say you said it would be wrong to rape a dead person or a comatose person.
I didn't say a dead person, a comatose person. Yes, I said it would be wrong to rape a comatose person because a society which allows that is a society which is likely to cause unnecessary suffering in all kinds of other ways.
Okay, so when you did that, what you did was we gave you the example for reality to be the deciding factor. You then submitted that society was superior because society then ruled. And so this is the point. You're trying to hold on to something, and you're struggling to keep it consistent, and that's why you're falling back to saying society. But if society then decides, then might makes right.
I never said society decides. I defined the terms right and wrong for you.
Why is it wrong to rape a comatose person?
Because it is wrong because right is that which maximizes the well-being of conscious creatures. That's how I define the term. I don't define it based on the will of, as far as I can tell, imaginary beings. I define it as a particular state that maximizes the well-being of conscious creatures. And as far as I can tell, a society that permits we'll ignore the society part. The act of raping even a comatose person, which is, I guess, having sex with them against their will, is an act.
It's against their will. They're comatose. They're not making a volitional decision at all.
Well, it's certainly not in line with their will because they haven't made a decision.
How do you know?
Okay. So without their consent, we'll reverse it the other way.
Why does their consent matter?
Because
your worldview, why does it matter?
Because it's conducive to better well-being. That's why it would matter.
So what? We're just reactions, chemical reactions.
Well,
why would any of it
if that's really the case, then I'm a chemical reaction who happens to care about what kinds of experiences I'm subjected to.
So then, do you believe in survival of the fittest?
Do I believe? Yeah. What do you think that means?
So then, shouldn't the more superior be able to survive? Why do we as human beings take care of the weak?
Because the ones who take care of their weak will more likely have their genes passed on.
Based on what? I mean, if I go feed a homeless person,
okay, so
that has no bearing on my next generation.
In terms of, so yeah, so as far as evolution is concerned, we're talking about kin members mostly. You would take care of your members of your family because they share your same genes. What that does is, so if somebody the first person who has a gene that says take care of your family, they do, and because their offspring also have that gene becomes more and more popular until eventually it's there.
And where do they get this magical gene that says take care of your family?
They get it from mutation, by the way.
And can you name a single positive mutation?
Yeah, I can. I actually maintain a list. I'm going to have to look it up.
Well, send me the list because I've seen many lists, and when you look into each of those lists and start digging in, you find out that I've yet to find a single positive mutation. There's been mutations that don't have a harmful effect, but that doesn't mean they're positive. And you have to have billions upon billions upon billions.
Okay, so how about the mutation for the antifreeze in the ice fish of Antarctica?
Send me the link in chat.
Yeah. So I don't have a particular link. It's just the work of David Kingsley. You can look up his videos of him talking about it on YouTube. David Kingsley, if you want to write that down or something, or you can watch this video again and hear me say that. David Kingsley is the one who's worked on sticklebacks. I forget who it was who did the ice fish.
Okay.
I'll look up who did but you can just look up ice fish antifreeze mutation and you'll be able to find all kinds of information about it, where it's been shown that these fish have a gene that produces a normal enzyme for their digestive system. That gene has been duplicated by a mutation, and then mutation has modified the gene so that now instead of serving as an enzyme, it serves as an antifreeze, and which is particularly helpful for fish that live in Antarctica.
Okay, so with this, okay, I've been trying to get you to stick to this one thing, but we keep getting off.
Okay.
I'm trying to get you to tell me what gets to define right and wrong. Now, you're saying it's reality that you've defined by a subtotal of experiences. When I give you an experience you can't explain, you then default to society.
I never said right and wrong were defined by reality.
Okay, what defines right and wrong?
What define human beings? Okay, reality defines right and wrong in the sense that reality sculpted human beings by evolution, and human beings care about how they are treated by each other. And morality is the word we use for treating each other in ways
human beings care about. Human beings care about. Say that again.
Human beings care about how they are treated.
Human beings care about how they're treated.
Human beings in general care about what kinds of experiences they have. They don't particularly enjoy, starving in a rainy ditch.
And yet, we see over and over again that human beings don't care about one another very often throughout all of human history.
Yeah, and the ones that do form more successful societies overall.
That has not been proven true throughout history either.
What do you mean? America has done quite well.
Because it was based on Christian principles. So you don't use an example of a nation that relies on Christian principles to prove that Christian principles don't exist. That doesn't make a very good argument.
Well, I don't think the Christian principles that the nation is founded on are really anything like the religious right of today, but fair enough.
Yeah, they were much more religious.
I know that quite a few of the founding fathers were much more deist.
Two of them. Those are the only two you ever hear of, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin.
Okay. Well,
the rest of them were
I'll just give you another example, since you don't like that one. Which is, it doesn't actually refute my point, though. I'm saying that societies that treat each other better are more successful. I didn't say that whether they operate on Christian principles or not.
But the point being is the reason that America treated people better was because of the way they based on the Christian principles. It's the same reason.
Okay, but it's still irrelevant to my point. My point was that societies that treat each other better are more successful. Societies that care about that attempt to maximize the well-being of conscious creatures are more successful.
Which nations, like Genghis Khan, he was very successful. They didn't seem to care about people.
For how long?
America is the only nation ever in all of history to be able to go as long as we have without a change in government, without a revolution. So, I think the problem you have is you're suffering from living in America and not knowing history. Okay?
Okay.
There hasn't been a single nation that has gone as long as we have without having a change in government.
My point is not particularly about America. America was an example to my point that nations that attempt to treat each other, and I think that's actually demonstrable in most of the Western world.
Let me ask you this question. If I could prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt to your liking that God exists, would you worship him?
Would I worship? Yeah, I guess I would.
Okay. What would that take?
What would that take? I don't know. Why don't you describe some of the attributes of the particular God you're talking about? I mean, I think I have a basic idea, but why don't you...
Well, no. What I'm asking you is, you started the hangout saying that there was no testable evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going back to this. If you haven't figured, there's three things I've been going back to over and over again. Mm-hmm. Okay, who gets to make the decision of right and wrong?
Yeah.
What is the definer on that? What is this testable information that you say that there's no testable information for, as you said, the God hypothesis?
Well, see, it's not on me to tell you what the testable information was, because I'm not the one who believes in God.
You're the one that you're the one that's saying it's not testable. So I'm asking you what evidence it would take.
I'll rephrase. Any concept of God that I've heard of and the interactions that I've had with Christians tells me that the God hypothesis is not testable, because when we, for instance, try to point out something about the world and say this is not how this God would have made the world, they say, oh no, he would have made it that way. There's no particular test.
But notice what you're saying. You're then saying that you define how God should make the world.
I'm asking somebody to define how God should make the world. If God could make the world in a way that is completely the same as if there was no God, then I have no reason to believe in him.
Except you rely on him for that argument.
How? In what way?
Knowledge, truth, laws of logic, morality, all these things we keep getting back to, which is the third thing we keep getting back to. You can't explain them from a chemical reaction point of view. Chemical reactions don't produce morality. They don't produce what you're arguing for, this sense of right and wrong.
So I said that the laws of logic are discoveries made by human beings. I said that knowledge is a state in the human brain.
But
I said
they're discoveries, which means they exist outside of.
Okay.
Because we discovered them. Why do they exist? There's no reason they need to.
Yeah, there's no reason they need to. Why does God need to exist?
So the fact that they do is your evidence. Why do you reject that?
Because there's nothing about the God hypothesis that says for sure God would make these particular laws of logic. There's nothing about it that says God would make laws of logic in particular.
But when you look at who God is, it makes sense. When you look at no God, then the universe doesn't make sense.
So
we should see chaos.
We don't see chaos?
We should see chaos.
I know, but
we shouldn't see an ordered universe.
It would seem that the argument would then imply that we don't see chaos. But you don't think we see chaos in this universe?
We see an ordered universe that works consistently.
How do you know that it works consistently? You know, like actually, the inconsistency of the universe used to be used as an argument for God and for spiritual beings of some sort, because, for instance, the math that we had for how the planets move used to not be all that accurate, and they would move in ways that we didn't expect. And people said, oh, well, that must be because the angels are up there pushing them around, and so they don't have to follow any particular rules. And so that's proof that there's a supernatural realm to it.
Yeah, and science used to teach the world was flat when the Bible taught that it was round.
Really? Does the Bible teach that the earth goes around the sun?
In Isaiah, it teaches us that it states very clearly that the earth is round.
What, because it says it's a circle? Because it says it was... Well, see, the thing is, it was known that the world was round. I mean, the flat earth idea... saying that Christians or Jews or whatever believed in a flat earth is a straw man. I mean, but most of the ancient world, you have to go back a long time to find a world where learned people thought the earth was flat. But
that's what's... I mean, look, do you believe in an ethos?
What's an ethos?
The thing that is between me and this door. This invisible ethos that was... proven.
Air?
No. Ethos was something that Einstein proved didn't exist.
Okay.
But before that, it was an absolute truth. The problem is you're trusting in a science that is not consistent, because what you're being told, what you're arguing for today as absolute will change. For example, the age of the universe. It's constantly being changed and adding more years. How can you're trusting in something that can't predict, because it keeps having to change, because people use science as a religion. They use science as a philosophical argument, and that has left the realm of science, okay, and gotten into a realm of philosophy. And when people argue for science that way, it's not science. You want scientific proof for the creation of the universe, there's only one place you can turn. Because there's only one person who observed it and created it and can recreate it, and that's God. You want scientific proof using the scientific method, then you turn to the Bible. If you don't want that, then all you have is philosophy. When you look at a Big Bang, you're looking at evidence and you're drawing a conclusion and saying this must be the only conclusion. Yet there's tons of evidence for things like a young Earth. But you'll reject them, or you'll do a life-saving technique to explain away so you can keep millions of years. Because you're going to hold to those things that you must hold to. But when we find red blood cells in a T-Rex, or we find soft tissue in dinosaurs, that can't possibly last millions of years.
It can't if they're encased in rock the whole time. They're
Really?
only found in the uncracked dinosaur bones. The cracked ones don't have the soft tissue where the air can get at them.
For millions of years.
Yeah, and they're not. There's indications that it looks like red blood cells, but they have decayed. There's no DNA that's been extracted, for instance. It's broken down, the material in there. I mean, who are you to say that it can't exist for millions of years? That's the thing.
I'll go with Mary Schneider, who found the red blood cells, and she said it can't possibly last for millions of years.
No, she didn't. She said that she doesn't appreciate creationists using her findings for their arguments. That's what she said.
Of course, because she doesn't like the conclusions, but it doesn't ignore the evidence. Here again, look at what you're doing. You're saying, well, if I don't
I'm not going to look at what I'm doing.
You're ignoring the evidence, just like with Behe. With Behe, you ignore the evidence.
Because Behe was disproven.
No, he wasn't.
Yes, he was. They found a precursor to the bacterial flagellum. It's called the type 3 secretory system.
So you are showing the exact thing of what I started with, saying that you have a confirmed bias.
So if I defend a point of view, I'm just biased.
No, it's the reason you're rejecting. You rejected Behe's argument based on a court case.
Because you're acting like you're some kind of scientific Superman who has all this information that I should just buy the second you tell it to me.
If you notice, I'm referring you to others. You haven't done that.
Yeah, you referred
other
to
than
Michael
one
Behe.
time, and you weren't sure what that reference was. But I gave you
all the information you need to find it. I gave you all the information you need to find the ice fish of Antarctica antifreeze gene. Just look it up.
I said that's the one time that you gave it. You've made many other claims.
No, I also claim that I have a. Did I claim? I think it was like an hour ago or so. But I have a friend who's a geneticist in Texas. His name is. What is his last name? His first name is Zach. He did a podcast series called Evolution 101. He's a PhD.
So here's
Zachary Moore.
So here's your
acquaintances. We're not great friends.
Here's your proof for God.
Okay, what's my proof for God?
Your worldview has yet in how long we've been, almost 2 hours, you've yet to account.
You keep saying that my worldview can't account for things, but you're just saying
because
that.
When I give you an example, you leave reality and say, well, society determined.
But I just defined all the terms that we referred to, and you just aren't accepting it. You keep saying your presuppositional argument to me over and over again.
Again, well, because your argument is society determines what's best, and that's what defines right.
No.
And it's
my argument was never that society determines what's best. My argument was that certain situations, just as a matter of reality, in the same way that when you put vinegar and baking soda together, it fizzes. When you put certain rules and systems together for a human society, it causes unnecessary suffering. And in other situations, it doesn't cause unnecessary suffering. I call those terms right and wrong.
So since we know that abortion causes harm to a child, and
in the situations where it does cause harm to a child,
statistically has
I would
shown
say it shouldn't happen.
That women are 4 times more likely to be depressed and rely on drugs to deal with guilt. Shouldn't we say it's wrong? because it's clearly harming both the mother and the child.
Fair enough. If all those premises are true, I will agree with your conclusion. I don't agree that all abortions take place on fetuses which are at a level where they can actually feel pain.
But it still does harm to the mother.
Maybe. You've said that. I'd have to do some more research on it. If that premise is true, I will agree with it.
But
if that premise is true, I will agree with it. I would have to do some more research to find out if it's true.
Who becomes the authority, or what becomes the authority, because you don't want to say a who, so what becomes this authority that says this is right and this is wrong? What's the standard?
The standard, I gave a working definition of morality. I actually think it's the definition that crosses all human cultures.
You gave a definition that you jettisoned once I gave an example of raping a comatose person. You then relied on society. Because when you have an argument, you say this is the definition, this is the authority.
Yes.
You defined it as reality. Okay. Then I give it a situation and you say, well, society. Now society just trumped reality, so society is now the determiner.
But I don't think you actually did that. Is it? I don't think you actually made a case for that. I mean, I understand.
Okay, so is raping a comatose person wrong?
I do think it is wrong. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong because I think, consistent with my definition, that wrong is that which causes unnecessary harm. I think it causes unnecessary harm.
To who?
Well, for one thing, to the rape victim, if they discover, when they wake up, or if they wake up, maybe they don't wake up, but they do sometimes wake up. So then what's going to happen?
There was a dentist that was putting patients to sleep and raping them. And the only way they discovered it was because one girl got pregnant. The others never even knew that it happened to them.
I would say that caused unnecessary suffering. How about when they found out afterwards?
Was it wrong?
Yeah, it was wrong. It caused unnecessary suffering.
It caused no suffering to them. They never knew it happened.
How about after, when they clearly did find out that it happened, when it came to life?
So then what was wrong is revealing that it happened. Because that's what caused the suffering, not the rape. So why is the rape wrong?
Well, because the course of action is likely to cause unnecessary suffering. I mean, would you not agree that people who engage in those kinds of plots have an uncanny tendency to be found out?
I'm asking for consistency, and you're not giving consistency.
I use the same definition over and over and over again. That's pretty consistent.
So is the rape itself wrong?
Yes, because it's likely to cause unnecessary suffering.
It caused absolutely no suffering because they didn't know about it. The revealing of it caused the suffering, not the rape.
I said it was likely to cause unnecessary suffering.
But it didn't cause likely. Your definition wasn't likely to cause suffering. It was to cause suffering.
Because you don't know exactly what your actions' consequences are going to be before you make them.
So then everything can be wrong. I mean, I think you're harming me in this conversation just because it offends me. Does that mean that you're wrong?
Do you have a good reason to actually think that I am harming you?
Do I need to? Does it matter in your definition?
Yeah, it does, actually. Yeah, it does.
Because you're saying the rape itself is wrong, but the rape didn't cause any harm whatsoever.
But you haven't demonstrated that at all. And besides,
because they didn't know about it. What caused the harm was revealing it. And listen to what, please, listen to what you're doing. You're not being consistent. I'm pushing you because I'm trying to show this, and what you're doing is you keep diving in.
But I just said because it was choosing that action was likely to cause unnecessary suffering.
So now with the definition is anything that would likely cause harm.
They're pretty much the same definition because human beings deciding our course of action don't know exactly what's going to happen. We have to judge on what's probably going to happen.
So human beings, though, don't decide. You already said that. It's not a who, it's a what. You said it's reality. So human beings are not the factor in the decision.
It's not related to the definition. The definition is that unnecessary suffering is wrong. The condition is that human beings don't know exactly what's going to happen when we choose our course of action. Therefore, if you choose a course of action that is probably going to cause unnecessary suffering,
how do you know it's probably going to cause suffering?
Because you are having sex with someone against their consent. That causes suffering most of the time. Most of the time. And oftentimes people who try to get away with that sort of thing get found out.
The reality is that I can say rape is wrong because it goes against God's nature. This is why I can say that the act of rape is wrong.
So I have a question for you. Universally, because these immaterial things are universal, is the act of supernaturally, because this being is all powerful, sending 2 bears to rip apart 40 small children, is that wrong?
That's justice. Is God not just?
For making fun of a guy? It's just to kill 40 children for making fun of someone. It sounds like if that's justice, justice is just whatever your book says it is.
No, justice is defined by the nature of God. But the difference is you can't explain justice in your worldview. Because society can just change.
We weren't attempting to. Look, I'm not an expert in every single field that there is, but you seem to have one way of answering everything. God says so, or God just did so.
And that's because God created the universe, and everything you see is the whole thing is you're arguing there's no evidence for God. It's right in front of you. You're using it. You're relying on God to deny God.
No, I'm not. Okay, you say I am, I say I'm not. So now how do we decide?
Well, since you've yet to account for these things.
But you can't account for them either. You're just saying God says so. You didn't account for them.
Okay.
How do you account that God exists?
I'll say it again. I said this earlier, and you can rewatch and listen and say I said this earlier. Mm-hmm. We were made in the image of God, meaning that we have certain communicable attributes that God has given us.
Blah, 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 blah. You're just saying stuff. You're not telling me why. You're just asserting still. I need you to tell me why. I need you to explain why that's true. You're just claiming it's true in the same way that I'm just claiming that reality is the way it is.
Spencer, I'm explaining it, and you're saying that I'm just making statements, but you've been making constant statements. The difference is you can't stay consistent with them.
I have stayed consistent the whole time.
Is rape wrong?
Yeah, rape is wrong.
What makes rape wrong?
Because it causes unnecessary suffering.
And yet a person that doesn't have any suffering from the rape, that's comatose or put to sleep, has no suffering whatsoever. So therefore, by your definition, he just dropped out. Okay, well, for anyone that's watching, what you saw there is that Spencer left because he got tired of this being pointed out to him over and over and over. He wants to say rape is wrong, but the rape, by his definition, is not wrong. He knows it's wrong. Why does he know it's wrong? Because God gave him a conscience. That's the reality. You see him getting frustrated to a point where he's just going to bail out of the conversation. I didn't boot him. He bailed. He left the group. He did so because he's seeing an inconsistency that he doesn't want to see. He wants to say rape is wrong. Why am I using this as an example? Because I'm using it so that he would see that I let him, and if you watch, you'll see, watch from the beginning, you'll see I let him do a lot of talking up front to explain his positions so that I can see where he's going to go. Then I gave arguments in his worldview and argued from his point of view, and he was inconsistent. He couldn't hold to his own definitions. He's saying that it's the harm done to the person. In the example that was provided with the dentist, the women never even knew it happened. There was no harm done in the rape. Therefore, the rape itself couldn't have been wrong by his definition. It was the revealing of the rape that did the harm. That, in his definition, should have been what was wrong, not the rape. When you get into what's potentially, well, how do you define what's potentially? I mean,
Potentially, some people thought it was good to kill Hitler because of the lives they would have saved. As a Christian, even as bad as Hitler was, I would still say it would be wrong to murder someone like that. It would have to be an act of justice. And so you have a case where we can account for the morality that we've been talking about. Whether he wants to accept it or not, what you're seeing is someone who is getting frustrated and frustrated and frustrated when his worldview is being presented to him, and he never had to accept that challenge to looking at it. And what he was doing is, as Joe's saying in chat, he was making a lot of red herring arguments, and he was getting frustrated when they were being exposed. That's why I tried to do the example, the thought game of saying, I know your name is Steve, born in 1929 in Italy. The reason is because that exposed exactly what you saw him doing throughout. Why is rape wrong? It's because it does harm to someone. Okay, they're unconscious. They don't know that it did harm. Well, it's potentially doing harm. You see, he's always going to have a way of trying to explain it. Why? Because of the confirmed bias, he will not accept any evidence for God, even if the evidence is right in front of him. That is not someone that people want to argue that they're really smart and reasonable and open-minded, but they're not. They're closed-minded to anything supernatural. And you heard that with him. You heard from Spencer that he will not accept anything that's supernatural. Okay? I would not, after 6 months of studying biology, claim to be as expert as he claimed to be with 6 months of study. The reality is that I tried to give him things he could look up, different people, even non-believers. But notice how he argued. Well, he doesn't accept someone because of the way they behaved. Or, Mary Schneider doesn't like the way people use the evidence that she discovered. Well, the evidence is the evidence. And the reality is we're going to look at what the evidence is pointing to. And people don't like, well, I don't like the conclusion you draw. Well, what is that? That's called a confirmed bias. I don't want you as a Christian taking the evidence of my discovery and using it to show something other than what I want to believe. So when you deal with someone like this, now some may say, well, how is this using the presuppositional apologetic? What I kept coming back to over and over with him is this one thing. Well, three things, right? I kept coming back to what's the standard of who defines morality? How does he account for these immaterial things that he clearly is using? Okay? Because he kept struggling with that. We kept going back to these points. Why? Because he can't account for them. This is the precept. Now, if you noticed, I was willing to encounter with him and talk with him about some of the evidential arguments. Not because I'm trying to prove God through evidence. What I'm doing with the evidence is showing where his argumentation is lacking. And that's how we want to use the evidence. Use the evidence to show that their worldview can't account for their own worldview. What you see in that is you see people that will jump to some life-saving, mechanism. A great book on this is Jason Lyle's book, The Ultimate Proof of Creation. That's a book that shows the argumentation for presuppositional apologetics using laws of logic and morality. But the thing that you also see in there is you see him talking about how people will use a life-saving technique when their argument is got a problem. And as long as someone is going to argue from a confirmed bias, now think about how I started. I started in defining what a presupposition is. We never got to a Spencer where he said that God can't predict anything. Well, I don't know. In Daniel, it predicted the next 4 empires and even names 2 of them by name. That's a prediction. And yeah, it was right. So clear was Daniel's predictions and Isaiah's predictions that people argued that these had to have been later works of literature until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and we found dating them 1,000 years earlier, dating them before these prophecies were fulfilled, which created a whole big problem for the liberal theologians who want to argue that these were later writings because they don't want to accept the supernatural. The Bible predicts things. It predicts why, what Spencer couldn't answer. What Spencer couldn't answer is how in the world do we see evil in the world? If we're evolved and we're all doing what's best for one another, and we're all just trying to be this superior race of individuals that's evolved to doing what's better, then explain why we still see evil. We can't explain that from an atheistic worldview that believes as Spencer believes. We never even got to get there, unfortunately. But when we get to that point, you see that the belief system of atheism is lacking because it can't answer for evil. It can't answer for why there's still wars if we're so evolved. But the Bible can, because it predicted those things when it explained that we have a sin nature, that we violate God's law. And it also predicted that God himself would come to earth, die on a cross, and be the bearer of sin, that we might receive the righteousness of Christ and be forgiven of sin. That is also predicted. These things Christianity has answers for. Atheism cannot predict them. And he's going to rely on a scientific belief system that has changed. A scientific system that used to teach, it was interesting that he asked whether the Bible says that the earth revolves around, or that the earth revolves around the sun. And he wants to say, does the Bible teach that? Well, science used to teach that the earth was the center of the universe. We now know different. And even though all of their mathematics worked, when Kepler gave a different argument, people didn't accept it because their math worked until they were proven wrong. And those same scientists that were so absolute are the same scientists that Spencer is trusting in. And those scientists, 50 years, 100 years from now, if God tarries, the things that people hold to now as absolute, they're going to reject. And you won't hear them talk about it. Just like you don't hear them talk about eugenics and these different things anymore once we see the errors of those. You don't hear people, Spencer doesn't even know what ethos is. But go back 100 years before Einstein proved that that doesn't exist, and that was an accepted fact. And this is the thing. When you do this, you must understand what your presuppositions are and be willing to question those. Why don't I question God and his word? For a very simple reason. One, there's nothing that we would not be able to have the discussion we had tonight if God didn't exist. Knowledge, truth, ability to reason, laws of logic, morality, all these things require God. That's why I don't question that. His word, I've already done the research on that. And so I don't question his word because I already did question it when I became a Christian. And with my engineering type of background, I challenged myself to look for errors and contradictions in the Bible. And the more I've gone to these atheist websites where they give the list of contradictions, and every one of them is just an atheist taking something out of context, historical context, that's scriptural context, it's cultural context, and they want to shove it in a 21st century world and then say it's wrong. And that's the problem. If you are in a situation like Spencer, my challenge to you is realize that when you deny God, you rely on God to deny him. That is why God says, the fool says in his heart there is no God, because to deny God requires God. I challenge you to consider the fact that on Judgment Day, and we all will face Judgment Day, your arguments for atheism won't matter. We have all broken God's law. And you may be a professing atheist, and you may be far more moral than me. But that's not going to help you on Judgment Day. It's not because you're better than me that you're going to get in a right standing with God. I don't have a right standing with God because of what I did. I have a right standing with God because of what he did on that cross when he took my punishment upon himself. And what I did was to trust in that and to turn from trusting myself and trusting in Christ. That's what we must do to be in a right state with him. I hope maybe this was helpful for some, and maybe you learned some things. I understand it could get frustrating, but notice how I kept going back to the same 3 points over and over. It frustrated him to a point where he ditched. Spencer left because he knew he was being inconsistent, and he doesn't want to have to answer for that. He knew he can't argue any longer that rape itself, the act of rape, is wrong because it isn't doing any harm in the examples that I gave. I'm not endorsing rape. Please understand that. I'm not endorsing rape. But I can argue why rape is wrong because God is not a rapist, because it violates God's nature. That's why it's wrong. I can give a reason why it's wrong. He said I can't give the why. There's the why. Because it violates God's nature. How do I know that it's wrong? Because I'm made in the image of God. That's why. He said I didn't give it, but I gave it in the very beginning, gave it to him a second time, now I give it to you guys a third time. There it is. But I do pray and hope that those watching would repent, put their faith in Jesus Christ, that you may have eternal life. Thank you very much for watching, for those who did. Thanks, Joe, for setting this up.